So welcome to the afternoon session. This is a little bit different topic from the morning. We can maybe say that this morning we did focus on a global issue, global things that is going on around the world, Australia, Asia, South America, Europe, etc. But now we're going maybe in more details and learning maybe from our neighbors in Norway. They have experience from decades of dealing with master plans and all these technical, economic, social and environmental issues regarding these kind of projects. So we have a very experienced people here from Norway today, and Mr. Håkon Tøyvold will start, and he has a decades of experience. Håkon, please. Take this down. Okay.
This one.
Okay.
Where do I control it?
I think that's just like
Is this one? Yeah. Okay. Yes. Good afternoon. We had a nice lunch, all of us. This will be a Veterans Hour because the three of us are going to focus on the master plan for Norway. We worked with this in the last century. So this is old news, but I think it's relevant for the situation in Iceland and many other countries. So I hope you will enjoy the presentations. It's somewhat similar to what I gave it at Summer Cooping in Kumping. How do you the big conference in Akureyri in May, you know. So those who listen to me, that will recognize some of the pictures. I'm now still affiliated to the Norwegian Institute for Water Research, but at the time the project, we worked with the Samlet Plan, the master plan. I was in the Ministry of Environment. Okay, 3 parts. First, a little about hydropower in Norway, very shortly. Then something about the framework for planning hydropower, the framework around the licensing procedures. Then the master plan itself, and then some consideration about what happened to the plan, why was it abandoned, the relation with the framework directive, and then some comments on Iceland and Norway master planning, as far as I have know something about it. This is hydropower in Europe, and you see there are in the bottom of the slide you see Iceland, you see France, Sweden, Norway, and Turkey. And the light blue is what is actually developed, and the gray dark red is what's actually the remaining potentials. It's relevant to slides shown before. If we take the lower part of it and look at Iceland and Norway, we see that there are vast resources, but Norway has much more developed percentage of what is economically feasible than Iceland. That's a big difference. We are in a kind of a decade or two phase before Iceland as far as development of hydropower resources is concerned. As you know, we are very favorable in the national conditions for hydropower, affluent water resources, precipitation rather evenly distributed, large mountain plateaus, reservoirs in natural lakes, and short distances from mountain to fjord. Like Iceland, we are a hydropower country and have an electricity production of 98% renewable. We have a coal-fired power plant in Svalbard, which we don't like. It's going to be closed down. But most of this is hydro. We have some wind also. The production and potential as of 2014, you see the dark blue is, see if this works. No. The dark blue is what is developed, the light blue is what is protected, and this part of the cake is what is possible to do something with as of 2014. If you look at the potential and the production, you can roughly say its installation and yearly production is 10 times what we have here in Iceland. Just to We have 1,580 hydropower plants, maybe a little more now. There are small and big plants, and there are some very small plants by the famous humorist Orkustofnun designed here. And we have the largest of them all, Ullafjörður, which produces 8 terawatt hours per year. We have an extensive international connections between Norway and Russia, between Norway and Finland, and particularly with Sweden, of course, and also with Denmark, the Netherlands, and Germany. And there are 2 intercontinental cables now under construction. One is to UK, and the other one is to Germany or the Netherlands, I don't remember. The question of green battery, Norway as a green battery, is heavily discussed. There are lots of plans and reports being made, but there is not actually a big activity on Norway as a green battery so far. But there are exchanges between the countries. But you know, that's something that is relevant, and we had the presentation from Tasmania and Australia here, and I guess there's a lot to learn from the discussions you are and what you have and what we are going to do and what we are discussing in Norway. As you see, we export and import through this intercontinental transmissions line. You see that the red one is export and the blue one is import, and as an average, we export a little more than we import, you know. So there's big flexibility in the system. Actually, we started with great hydropower in 1911. The Sam Eyde was the founder of Norwegian Hydro, and this is the place where one of the most famous commando raids in the Second World War, where the commando soldiers landed at the plateau of Hardangervidda and then blew up the heavy water production that the Germans, the Nazis, were supposed to use for production of the atomic bomb, you know. It was very famous. There is many movies, one of them with Kirk Douglas and the other one with other famous American actors. That was the real first big hydropower station in Norway. And this is interesting, related to what we saw from Iceland, is it installed capacity from 1950 to up till now, and we see that the large period of hydropower building up was actually from in the 60s and 70s, and then it kind of leveled off. There's something new coming up, but the real big plants, the large plants with large reservoirs, came in the 60s and the 70s up to 1980, 85, and then a little more, but not really big projects anymore. A lot of small projects, but the yearly production and the capacity didn't increase too much. But in the environmental conflicts, the first one came, this is Norway's highest waterfall, and here is a famous philosophy professor, Arne Næss, being carried away by the police. That was a major environmental protest, the first in 1976. And he seemed to enjoy being carried away by policemen. Then the main and the background for the master plan was actually the Alta conflict in 1981. This is the Alta power plant. It was built after all, but after a lot of fuss and conflicts. Here you see there was a vast demonstrations, and people actually tried to block the construction by civil obedience, and 400 policemen had to be shipped up to Alta from the Oslo and the eastern part of the country to carry away the people. It was not violent, but it's actually half violent. They had to cut off the chains, and really was a heavy conflict. And that was maybe one of the backgrounds for the master plan, because up till then, the late 70s, hydropower development had been decided on a one-to-one basis. One license, then you do that process, another one, and they said, we can't stand this anymore. We cannot have this kind of conflict level anymore. We have to do something. And then they started to do some kind of master planning. But before focusing on the master plan itself, it should be mentioned that in the center there, the hydropower licensing is surrounded by lots of framework activities. Some of them are, for instance, hydropower plans, master plan. Let's see. Oh, I'm trying to find out how to find the red spot here. It doesn't work. This one? Okay, here we go. Yeah, it should be green, this one. Everything should be green now. The master plan, small hydropower plants, revision of licensing terms. Sorry. Climate plans. Then you have conservation-related plans, like the watercourse protection plan, national salmon rivers, interference of free areas, wild areas, and then we have some Planning Building Act, Nature Diversity Act, the Water Framework Directive. Everything is kind of forming constraints or kind of initiatives for hydropower licensing. The most important of these are the Watercourse Protection Plan, as Torald has mentioned shortly, the master plan itself, the revision of licensing terms, and the EU Framework Directive. These are the most important actual frameworks around the licensing procedures. Let's say a few words about the watercourse protection plans. It covers about, is it 30% of the land area, or is it 40%? You said 40 to 50. I said 30.
I said more than 60.
More than 60, okay. We can discuss that in the coffee break.
Exactly 66.
But you know, these areas are protected against further hydropower development. And it's decided by the Storting, and it actually was developed from 1973 to 2009. Then came this master plan for water resources, and it has served as a key management tool for 35 years, from 1981 to 2016. So it was a management framework instrument for many, many years, but it's now been abandoned, and I come back to that. Why did they abandon it? The goal of the plan was to propose to the Alting or Storting a priority, or Parliament, a priority grouping of hydropower projects for subsequent consideration for licensing. Priority should be given to projects with least cost and least environmental impacts. Also economy and impacts, environmental impacts. It's not social impacts are not mentioned here, you know. This took place in the 1980s. The plan should also provide a basis for deciding which watercourses should be reserved for other uses. The master plan for hydropower development, actually don't remember, it's only hydropower, it's not wind power, it's not geothermal or any other thing. It was focused on hydropower, because that was the only way to get electricity, more electricity at that time when that was relevant. So it was a national plan, feasibility studies before licensing. EAs were very important, and it was kind of could be considered as a pre-licensing planning for later evaluations. Weighing, comparing, and prioritization was the content of the plan. So what happened is that it was after the project as such, it was presented in 3 parliamentary reports in 85, 87, and 92. The first plan from 80 to 84, both myself and Torald and Are was involved heavily. My role was a project leader, and Torald was in charge of one of the hydropower group. There was a big fight in the start which projects ongoing in the planning process should be into the plan and which could be exempted, because it was necessary to build new plants to see to that you have enough electricity power. And some also of the temporarily protected projects were also included in the plan. In the plan, it was about 40 terawatt hours, something similar what you had in Iceland. We had 310 projects we were considering in 542 alternatives. There was made 246 project reports, 13 impact teams, and 16 priority groups that ended up in 3 categories. So now we go a little more in detail.
This is one of the project reports.
Yeah, one of them.
And it was quite many of them.
Of course, Torald will tell us a little more about the hydropower, the project planning, and the impact themes, call them user interests, where as such, nature conservation, recreation, fish, water supply, water pollution, cultural heritage, agriculture and forestry, reindeer husbandry, flooding, transport, ice, water, temperature, and climate. It could be both positive and negative effects, of course, not only negative. Remark that, for instance, something like biological diversity, that was an expression and a kind of concept that was not invented in the 1980s. Today, things would have been different. And not to forget, we had also a theme that was not, let's say, technical scientific, but regional economy. If it had been done today, there would be social impacts would have been a much, much larger from the role in the project as such. So how did we organize these things? This is, there was a steering group. The steering group was at a very, very high level. There were 5 ministries, and the top managers of the ministry, the top manager, not the politicians, but the top managers from 5 ministries were engaged. Then there was a project leader group and an administration put together by people from the Ministry of Oil and Energy, or the Ministry of, I think it was Oil and Energy, and the Ministry of Environment. And then there was an interdisciplinary core team and thematic groups. That was the central level. And then there was, at the county level, a contact group with the county governor, usually as a boss. Sorry. And then, these things are not, contact group with the county governor, and then there was the key person in each county, of which R.M. Obik was one of them, responsible for putting together all the projects in reports from each county. So you have a very strong, it was centralized, run actually from the government with short distance to the ministers, and a very important, let's say, producing level at the county level, where all the 12 to 15 key persons actually put all the themes and things together into reports. The thematic, here you see in more detail the administration of it. You have here 9 thematic teams. Of course, you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1 for hydropower, which Torald was in charge of and very active in. And then you had teams for nature conservation and recreation, fish and wildlife, water supply, cultural heritage, a kind of impact elements that are quite well known in hydropower planning. And then there was a group for regional economy and maps and data. And these kinds of leaders of each group formed a very, very, very important kind of a theme, interdisciplinary thematic core team. It was really interdisciplinary, people from the hydropower industry, and from NVE and from cultural heritage, all the central directorates or leaders of the group where formed this interdisciplinary thematic core team. And then we have all these counties and all those key persons, samlet plan, key persons in each county. So it was quite a heavy project that was very well anchored into the political level without being the politicians involved as such. They came later on making the parliamentary reports. This I can skip. So what did we produce? We had a lot of meetings and a lot of lunches, but we also produced something that is still available, and that is the 246 project reports. That is the core, I mean, the building block of the whole master plan are these reports. These are actually reports, and you have one of them there, from southern Trøndelag fylke, and these were actually producing the projects, and they were actually evaluating the impacts and give classifications and evaluations of each project. Then output number 2, where all these 246 reports and results were kind of integrated. Then we got this main project, the main report from the project, which was not politically anchored. There were one covering the whole country, and each report, one report from each county. And then after that, you see this is an old report, yellow. It's dirty because there's coffee spots on it, but it's from 1984 to 85. It was the proposal from the Ministry of Environment to the Storting through the government. Of course, there was not the direct line. This figure shows the stakeholder involvement as such. These reports were made by hydropower and all the impact themes. Then there was a hearing number 1, and this was condensed by the project into the main report with a proposal for a national plan with county reports, and was a hearing number 2. And then the ministry produced finally a parliamentary report that was treated by the Storting. First one in 86, and then 2 more reports ending up in 92. So there was a kind of extensive formal and informal involvement with stakeholders during the whole process. How did we do this, you know? Of course, with such a large number of projects and alternatives and data, we had to be very systematic. And standard and uniform approaches, extensive use of classification in groupings. Methods should allow to compare elements, project economy, user interest and impacts. The relative values between projects were more important than the absolute values. The relative between A, B and C were more important than just hitting the target of an exact value for project A. And transparency was, of course, very important. So at the end, you know, an energy company director would ask the question, why did my very nice project end up in category 3 in group 14? And then he or she could go into the documents and find out that was because of this class for impacts, this class for economy, and because of the impacts, it was because of the fish and natural wildlife and whatever it was impossible to find the basic reason for putting that project in such and such category or such and such group. Of course, it was also important to make the project easy to understand. It was actually a political project. It was not a scientific thing, you know. It was very close related to the management of hydropower and all its impacts. So, relax, I will not go through this in detail, but it shows the classification, the extensive classifications that we did during the project and during for one, let's say, alternative or one project. First, we started with to describe the area. And we classify the value of the data or the value of the area. And then with the project came into consideration, and the impacts were classified for all these 9 impacts at a scale from -4 to +4, or very large, from very large positive or very large negative impacts. And these things were put into the Samlet-plan, I mean the Vassdragsrapport, the project reports. And after hearing, some adjustments were made to the impacts, and it was a new classification from -4 to +4. And then what happened, all these 9 themes were kind of condensed into one impact class. Impact class that was actually named K1 to K8. And then Torod and his team came into with the projects classifying from economy 1 to economy 6. Then we had the grouping, and then we had the regional economy coming in, and then we had finally a priority grouping in 16 group from 1 to 16. This is of course very difficult to grasp the magnitude of this, but it was a lot of classifications built upon each other during the whole project. So, for instance, this is a summary sheet for the 246 vassdragsrapporter, one of them. And you see here the classification on, it is Norwegian, but you see here the classification of all the impact themes, and you see information about the project, its production and its you see some basic information, and here is a classification of the quality of data that we estimated was relevant for that particular project. And here we see, after adjustment, after the hearing, then we finally further discussed the impact of the project. And here you see the screen, the same kind of characters from -4 to +4 classification in the final report. And then after the hearing, there was some changes. And then you see here a final classification of impacts, a classification of economy, and then it was finally put into a group. This is a very key figure. And all the projects, and this is only for one county, if you had the matrix for the whole project, it would be 542 dots on this matrix. And here you see all the projects in Møre and Romsdal County placed into that some kind of a matrix. And the matrix is built up by impact classes, consequence classes from K1 to K8. These are the least consequence, and these are the worst consequence, or most impacts by the project. And this down here is the economy class, and that Torald will go more into that. And so you see here, for instance, there are lots of projects in consequence class 7 and economy class 4. But this is only a preliminary step. We had to come some further, because in the next place we had to find out how should we balance the impacts and the economy. How do we do that? There is no...
Excuse me, may I ask, the economy, is it just the cost of the hydropower project itself? It's not the societal
No.
economic benefits for the commune?
No, that's right. Torald will tell you more about that, but it's two elements. It's of course the cost per produced, and it's some adjustments for the balance between winter and summer power. So social impacts is included in the regional economy, but not at this stage. So the social impacts is not included at all in this matrix. So, how do we balance economy and conflicts? For instance, everyone should know that the best projects are here. Small conflicts and cheap. The worst project is here. Very expensive, of course, it's economically feasible. I think the limit between 5 and 6 was economically feasible project at that time. These are the best and these are the worst. So how do we kind of classify or say something sensible to the politicians, having a matrix with 542 dots in it? So what we found out, we had to do some kind of thinking, and we made a philosophy saying that for the lower conflict classes, project economy is more weight. For the higher conflict classes, conflicts were given, as impacts were given more weight. So that the priority direction is not directly from here to here, but it's going to be above like this, you know. Makes sense. The more controversial a project is, in fact, in practice, the more weight you put on the impacts. If the conflicts are kind of small or half small, you know, the economy is more interesting to focus on as a priority. So we did a kind of what we did is a balancing like this. This is after the project was through the government. It was some adjustments, but here you see the economy classes from 1 to 6 and the consequence classes. But you don't go to the politicians with 16 groups. We made 16 groups like this. You see here's a lot of numbers, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3, 3, 4, and 16, and so on. What we said is that a project that is put in 5, even if it's here or there, are equal. So for instance, economy class 2, consequence class 5 is evaluated as equal with a more expensive project, but with a lower consequence C2. How is that something we said method? It's just common sense. We just had to find out something that sounds okay, and there's no black box or model behind it. It's just something we did and found out that we had to make some sensible result of it. And this is the end of the first parliamentary report. All the projects that ended up in group 1 and up till 5 were given a green color, and all projects from 6 to 8 were giving a yellow color, and the rest of us, they were giving it a red. Now we can easily guess what those colors mean, because there was a traffic light analogy. So the green, that means group 1 to 6, were giving a go for licensing. So let's say the screening for licensing through the master plan was done for all projects already from group 1 to 6. And then the yellow was from 6 to 9. Hold on, maybe it sounds very similar to the Icelandic approach. And then the red, primarily for other purposes, watercourse protection plan. Remark that it was not decided, the red project, it was not decided that it shouldn't be built or protected. It was just said that this is not for licensing. No, you have to do something else with it. And many of these things ended up in the watercourse protection plan. That's right. So here are the categories of the first plan, more formally. Projects of which can be considered for licensing immediately in order to secure the supply of electricity, group 1 to 5, it was group 1 to 6 in the master plan, 11 to 13 terawatt hours. So the size of the group 1 was tailored to the demand for year 2000. Remember, this was in 1985. And then category 2, project in water courses that could be used for hydropower or other purposes. It was kind of a waiting. We didn't know, hold on, we didn't know what to do with it. And then 3, not considered relevant for licensing now due to high degree of conflict with other user interests. Sorry. And other high development costs. And how was this tool used then? If you apply for a license after Samlet Plan was finished, you have to, in your license, you have to say something about how the project is related to the Samlet Plan, to the master plan. So it has to be considered, relation to the master plan had to be considered before licensing. And of course, the energy companies, they would ask, how do I get my project up in category 1? Then you can adjust the project, you could apply to the Ministry of Environment, and you could lift the project from category 2 or maybe also 3 up to category 1, and then you can apply for licensing. So that is how the screening worked in practice. So it is a part of the story that in the second round for the parliament, the yellow group was abandoned, as you see here. And it was only 2 groups, licensing or not licensing. So, I think even if I was a project leader for the first thing, I think I can say that it was a success. We managed to do this in a rather short time with lots of resources and had a good result, as the main report ended up in the parliament with very small changes and was approved by the Storting. Very strong political backing. Remember the Alta conflict. It was a nightmare for the politicians. So they said this had to be done across the political parties. High-level steering group, short way to the ministers, interdisciplinary teams, high level of representation at county level, and samlet plan persons in the counties, and rather good guidelines, I would say. And not to forget, we had enough resources. They said, get it done. We had some budgets, but we were ordered to run over the budgets. And the Riksrevisjon had some bad comments later on. So time was a limit, not resources. There was an airplane strike during the end of the project. We didn't care about that. We rented an airplane with 35 people to look at all the plants in Vest-Agder. So we had to get it done, and it was possible to get it done by the end because the Parliament wanted to have a combined view of both the master plan and the water protection plan and other issues. And it was also luck, hard work, and big enthusiasm back in the 80s. There was a problem. Hydropower project came in late for impact studies. That was not due to the group, but it was due to problems with the startup and conflicts between the ministries in the very, very first phase of the project. And method and development and implementation almost simultaneously. How we should do it, we had to find out and then actually do the things in very short time after. So now it's closed down after H died at age 35. Master plan for hydropower development 86 to 2017, rest in peace. In the parliamentary report, in 2016 it was closed down. And one may ask why? Why? It has worked in 35 years, but everything has a role for its time. It was not updated. These are the reasons in the parliamentary report on energy from 2016. Not updated since 1993. Few remaining projects. Most of the project portfolio had even been put in the protection plan. It has been applied for licensing, and it was kind of outdated. Only about 15 projects in the master plan are now ready for licensing. So many projects went into protection plan, and not to forget the EU framework, the EU Water Framework Directive has come as a kind of other planning tool that to some extent take care of the same issues as the master plan. And there was too much to have the EU Framework Directive running parallel with the new master plan. So that is the stortingsmelding. That was the kind of a deadly shot to the master plan, but they had their reasons. What they said in the parliamentary report wants more efficient licensing and proposed that the master plan should be abandoned as an element in hydropower management. The licensing procedure shall secure that projects with unacceptable environmental impacts and imply bad use of resources are not realized. This is what is said in the parliamentary report. 3 or 4 more slides I have about the framework directive. As is it also under implementation in Iceland. You are in the EOS. We are in a group with Liechtenstein, Norway, and Iceland. And I know that the implementation of the Water Framework Directive in Norway was delayed because of discussions between the Commission and Iceland. And that was a good thing to have more time to prepare for. So the implementation of the Framework Directive in Norway is 6 years, even if we are a full member of the directive, is 6-year delay related to all the other countries. Remember that. 11 regional water management plans were approved by the Ministry of Climate and Environment in 2016. And it's a special story related to hydropower because these plans, regional plans, were actually built up from the bottom by the counties, by the fylkeskommunene, and there was a small discrepancy between, let's say, the sum of the hydropower proposals in the regional plan and actually the national policy for hydropower. So there actually, unfortunately, would I say, were rather major changes were made at national level in the proposed regional regarding hydropower before approval. So, and there's still discussions with Brussels going on about how hydropower should be treated in the Water Framework Directive. And this is not a special case for Norway. There are discussions in many countries about how should we treat the hydropower, and let's say, which are mostly heavily modified, and how should we achieve the good ecological potential, which is the goal for most hydropower plants affected rivers and reservoirs in the Framework Directive. So there is a discussion going on, and most of the hydropower plants in Norway will be changed according to the vision of licensing system, and not so much according to the Water Framework Directive. That is the reality. And I think I'll skip this, but there has been a kind of, I would say conflict, but discussion between the management tool for revision of licensing and the management tool in the Water Framework Directive. This is something that is maybe a special Norwegian thing, you know, but there's something going on. But they have actually the same goal. The Water Framework Directive is focusing on improving the environment. The same thing is the revision system, but the revision of licensing is much wider focus than actually the Water Framework Directive, which focusing more on the water stream and its water ecology and water quality. So finally, I wouldn't say comparisons, but I have some information about the ongoing master planning in Iceland, and I think that you are now embarking on the 4th round after having a 3rd round that was not finally approved, I think. That's right. The difference, some differences, maybe I'm completely on vidda, as they say in Norway, but in Norway we only considered hydropower. Master plan is not the master plan for renewable energy, it was a master plan for hydropower, because that was the renewable energy at that time. In Norway, the master plan was actually at the end of the exploitable hydropower resources. As you saw from the circle, most of what we have is developed, and there is a small part of it that is possible to develop. Our production, yearly production is 135 terawatt hours, and the master plan was at that time covering about 40. And you have much more unexploited resources that are economically feasible, so there is a difference there. So you are at earlier, fortunately earlier stage, an earlier possibility to grasp most of the potential. We were at the end, also in the 80s. I think, as far as I know, there was a closer connection between the government and than in Norway than what you do in Iceland. I think it's a group that has little more distance to the decision makers. Maybe you disagree on that, but that's my impression. Environmental impacts on project were basis for the MP, as far as it was mentioned this morning. I think you mentioned that one of the criticisms from the power industry was that the third group, I mean the non-development group, was only based on the registration of the values and not on the impacts of a certain project. That is also a difference. And the social and economic impacts were included in Norway, but it was, as I know, not included in the 3rd round. Is right? There's a plan that was not adopted, but it will come up in the 4th, I understand. I would say that if the plan had been done today in Norway, the master plan, there would be much more impact, not much more emphasis on the social impacts and the economy for the local communities. We did a rather well job, but you know the impacts, let's say the poverty of the municipalities, the economic situation in the areas where the projects were actually located, didn't have that much influence on the priority. So it was a little weak, but it was included. So I think that's about it. About the outlook for hydropower in Norway, I will refer to what Torald said before lunch. There are actually wind, solar, energy saving, smart technology, Norway's a green battery, climate changes. There's a lot of uncertain and exciting things going on in the future. And of course, robust strategy and planning is necessary to grasp the possibilities in the future. I think was Torod mentioned that the impacts of climate change is actually something, an argument for embarking on a new master plan, of course with another approach. But there are so many new things coming up, green battery, climate change and so forth, green battery, wind power also needed. So a new, let's say, national strategy is also needed in Norway. Thank you for listening. I don't know if there are questions then.
Yeah, thanks, Håkon. Maybe there's some questions here now to Håkon. We have to use the phone because of other viewers.
Thank you. Thank you, Håkon. I'm just wondering, you gave out 3 reports in 85, 87, and 92.
Yeah.
And were you tackling a certain of the projects at each? I mean, how did you choose which ones to deal with in the first report and so forth? How did you prioritize which of the energy harnessing options you would be dealing with at each time?
I think it was there was some you can hear me? Yes. There were some exemptions for small hydropower. A lot of lists were taken out after the discussions between ministry and ministries, oil and energy and environment ministry. But the first big discussion before the first round was what project should be exempted from the plan because the need to have more power on the net continually, and which should be included in the plan. And that was a hard political fight between the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Oil and Energy in the first place. But when that was finished, it was more, let's say, a technical screening of who should be with and who should be not included. So it was actually small hydropower between at 10 megawatt or below. A large part of that was exempted from the plan. That's right. And there were some projects that were economically feasible that were exempted because they were so controversial that we would only destroy the reputation of the project. That was building a dam in the city center of Kongsberg. Another one was taking Glomma into the inner Oslo fjord. They were so ridiculous and very economically feasible, but it would destroy the whole thing and refocus the project. It was wrong to include it.
Any other questions? Yes, please. Maybe name.
Okay, so my name is Herdís. I work in the Ministry for the Environment on the master plan. We have met.
Yes, yes.
So I just wanted to ask about something that you just said. Before starting work on the master plan in Norway, did you actually exempt some projects that you knew you were going to do anyway?
Yes, yes.
So not all the projects that were possible were included in the master plan?
No. There was a list of, after a decision in the government, which should be included and which should not be included. There was a fight between, let's say, the energy sector. They wanted to have most projects exempted because they wanted to have the licensing procedure as it was before, and the Ministry of Environment wanted to have as much included in the plan. And there was a decision on that. Many of the big projects that are today in operation were a result of the projects exempted from the plan. And many of those large controversial ones, they are put into the protection plan later on. So there was a discussion, both political and also let's say, more administrative discussions, not to, let's say, have too many small projects that would kill the project as far as resource use is concerned.
Any other questions? Yep, please.
My name is Þóra Ellen Þórhallsdóttir.
Can you? I can't hear you if you don't
Yes.
speak in the microphone.
Þóra Ellen Þórhallsdóttir.
Yeah.
I'm a professor at the University of Iceland, and I have been on the steering committee of the Icelandic Framework Plan since the first phase. Thank you for a really interesting talk. I just wanted to make a small correction in that when you were mentioning the comparison with the Icelandic Framework Plan or Master Plan, the energy options were ranked according to the estimated environmental impact. That was used to rank the alternatives, not the values.
Okay.
If I understood you correctly. Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Yep. Guðrún?
Sorry, Håkon, you're just very popular. So you'll just have to stay there for the rest of the day.
Okay, I have a flight ticket tomorrow.
Oh, okay, good. Another thing I think distinguishes the Norwegian from the Icelandic, if I understood you correctly now, is that some options are taken out by the politicians before they ever enter the hands of the master plan. In Iceland, it is the energy companies, and through this institution then, which ask for permission to build a power station, and everything comes to the table of the master plan, which then, on the basis of the expert committees and the ranking, decides on what is to be recommended for protection and what is to wait for further decision, and then what gets the green light. So that's how we decide on the protection, at least on proposing protection, which then, of course, has to go through its proper channels. So leaving the option of what enters the table of the master plan at all to the chance of who happens to be Minister of the Environment and the Minister of Industry at each time seems to me a bit odd. With all due respect.
The reason for not taking major projects into the plan at the very start in 1982, 83, 81 was that there was a continuing increase in the demand and need for electricity. And the master plan actually, you can say that there was a flow of licensing procedures at various stages, and the master plan as such should make a dam. Block all this, the stream on licensing handling. But there had to be some openings in the dam because of the demand for energy. And I don't think anyone disagreed that there was a demand for some of the projects, some openings in this dam that was stop all the licensing. But the discussions were actually which projects should be exempted, of course, and then there was a disagreement between the two ministers that had to be solved in the government.
Thank you.
And those who worked with the project, we had just accepted this is out of the plan and this is not in the plans. But that didn't happen later on. It was before actually the first phase of the plan started up. Yes.
Okay, anyone else? If not, some more questions.
Thank you.
Now. Thank you very much, Håkon. And then we have a next expert from Norway, Torud Jensen, with a similar experience and knowledge.
Yeah.
Please.
Thank you. Well, by the way, this power station, which looks very nice, was actually one of the schemes in the plan. And that has recently been developed. Boulder, I need, yeah, they have on it. I'm not quite sure now, Håkon, where I should start, but I think some of the questions, I will give them a comment when I come to the relevant picture. First of all, I worked first 4 years in a group that should produce Chapter 3. Chapter 3 was the key product for all the other groups. They could not start before they had Chapter 3. And that was, of course, a headache. But before we started, a little history, because I guess also in Iceland you have many old studies on the potential for hydropower. In Norway we also had that. And in NVE it was a resource unit established in 1962. That was based on that work. And up to actually also the first years of the master plan we used old German maps from the Second World War, because they were better than other maps. So, there are many reasons why master plan today would be very different, because we didn't have the tool we have today. But it was much more work actually. What we had done just before was the small hydropower potential studies from 1978 to 1981, and I was the manager of that study. And with that in that study we developed some tools. For example, how to come up with a reliable calculation of the costs. All activities, including road construction, dam, tunnel, penstocks, intake, machinery for the turbines, generators, transformers, grid, everything. And that took, in this works, a couple of years actually to come up with a final product. And we had a lot of meetings with different manufacturers around Europe. So on that basis we brought into the master plan. So, but I can't remember, Håkon, that we actually excluded the small hydro. But I think because of this we had many schemes already identified as small hydro. It was identified in a cooperation with the hydropower companies in the counties, because at that time it was no free market. For example, in Hedmark County that you will hear about later, they had one company, and we discussed with them, and they more or less own that county. So whatever should be done there, they would implement it. So that was that time. We ended up with a resource of 7.5 terawatt hours in the small hydropower study. That all included hydropower with a small or big reservoir, but a reservoir, compared to later studies that doesn't have the reservoir. So we had that background. And I think that was very useful, because because all the groups that Håkon mentioned, as I mentioned, they couldn't start working before we gave them something to look on. Where would the dam be? Where would the power station be? How much water would we take out? What kind of reservoir would it be? All these questions were imperative for them in their work. And that also, of course, gave us a quite different pressure than what they had in the first years. We worked very long days. We worked in the weekends, and it was, as Håkon said, it was a lot of enthusiasm in that work. We were a team, no quarreling. We hadn't enough time for the quarreling. We had to produce and to put this into the system. So it was a very hard time the first 2 years to produce enough of the chapter 3. And it was, remember, we didn't have time, and also very often not the budget, to deeply establish a system for example, data handling. And so we used hydrology, the duration curve, which is known to some of you, and it was manual work. We tested it, and we knew that we were on the right track. The mistakes was not so big, so we felt quite safe. And I would also say later on, we have seen because it was implemented, some of this, we didn't actually, it was in between plus minus 15%. Also in the cost estimates, and also because we had a quite conservative cost estimate, but also in hydrology. And those of you who knows hydrology knows that hydrologists normally say plus minus 20. So they are not, even today, they cannot say what is the real truth. We developed a methodology for how to calculate the output and generation, and that methodology was forced on all consulting groups. They had to use it, no question. And we developed a way of presenting the results, so that because all these large number of schemes, when it comes to the other groups looking for information, they would know if I went to the page number 3 in that chapter 3, I would find that information. And that was the same for all reports. We have one of these examples here. For those of you who have interest, you can look into it, and it was based on the way that everyone, without actually being an engineer or whatever, could find the figures they were looking for easily. That was very important, and we did have a lot of discussions with consultants that they were used to do it another way, but we were very stubborn, and okay, we paid for it, so we had the right to say, sorry, that's the way you had to do it. But we used quite some time to discuss with them. And we identified the schemes in meetings, because also at that time we were able to grab the new maps whenever it was produced. We took it, and that gave a new situation in the understanding of what are the options. Remember also that we were very updated on that time, the state of art of technology, for tunneling, for dams, for turbines and everything. We were very updated. And we discussed with the local hydropower companies, and we come to them with ideas that they haven't seen before, and we had a lot of easy discussions and a lot of hard discussions. But I think it ended up very well. I mentioned earlier this morning the Mandal River and one plant there called Kjerka, which is now new. It's an old plant, it's upgraded, it's new, it has a much bigger reservoir than it had previously. That was inaugurated in December last year. And that was an example of ideas presented in 1985. But it took its time. We did a little of the study ourselves because we wanted to be updated on all the constraints that could happen. But mainly the consulting companies did it, and we also had extremely useful help from the hydropower companies themselves. It would be possible to do all this without without this good communication that we managed to establish with them. So stakeholders like the hydropower companies were important in our work. But anyway, it took its time, and of course it was a lot of complaints from the other groups. That's why it was a good thing that I had some of the small hydro to train on, so they could start with that. And I'll also just to mention for the debate or the questions why some of the projects were not taken up now or not taken into this master plan. I think most of the projects that were not taken in was projects already under licensing in NVE. And it was there because no one wanted to interrupt on electricity and availability of electricity, because even if the years after 1990 proved that we had a surplus, the story of that early years after 1990 is also that then actually the first phase of climate change started. We got much more precipitation than historically. So, but that's another story. I said we developed a technical cost manual that included, this is in Norwegian, but some of you can read it. Turbine, this is more or less the same. Ventil is a gate, generator, and then you have the switchgear systems inside the power station. You have the grid. In this case, it's not mentioned the dam and the waterways and all that which are linked to the constructing part, but we had everything, and we had the 1 to 10 megawatt cost estimate, but we did not have over, so that had to be produced new. That was developed new. And today it looks like this. This is one example of a Francis turbine. We have many of these, and it's distributed into the IEA hydro TCP. We still use it, not the same of course, because this has been changed every 5 years, ever since. It's been changed or updated, because there are technology development going on. There are new units, for example, in the tunneling. They are drilling, taking the North Sea technology into the mainland, and you can now drill 5 kilometers with this, and then you can have a choice if there are some certain places for a penstock which is dangerous, then you can drill. And that's one example. There are many of these, and there are different technologies for dams. All these are included in these cost manuals, and we use it when we look into the applications for licensing. It's all from NVE's used. It's used by all the Norwegian consulting companies in pre-feasibility studies, because it's there, it's proven. We know that it's good. It works very well in Norway, and I have also used it in many other countries in Africa and in East Asia, and I know it. You only need to adapt, of course, a little bit. It's been exported to some East European countries, but then developed specifically for these countries. But the idea was there, and it's still in use. We introduced the economy classes because we saw that you cannot. We wanted to have a simple way of actually telling that a hydropower plant that can generate power in wintertime has more value than a hydropower plant that can generate power when it's a lot of water in the river. And that's why we introduced the economy classes. It was very simple in one way, but in another way very, very, very advanced actually. But it is. You look into the investment cost and the annual generation capacity, and then you have a certain Norwegian kroner per kilowatt hour. And then you go in and see, okay, how much of this energy is produced in the period between November and May. And then let's say if that is 70%, then you will get a quite better economy class than if it had been 30%. So in that way we were able at least to come in to say something that this scheme, even if they have the same cost per kilowatt hour, that scheme is better than the other one. As Håkon said, it was roughly 40 terawatt hour per year. That was phase 1. And it was 310 separate projects, and most of the large one had more than one alternative, because that was needed. Because could be, for example, alternatives with reservoirs, or let's say you put in water from neighboring rivers and things like that. Phase 2 had roughly only half of the number of projects, and phase 3, that included the upgrading and the refurbishment project of large hydro. Then we started with that idea that we could get more out of the system that already was in operation. But in total, quite many projects. Each of these projects has this report. Each of them. It's not only the chapter 3. It includes information on what are the conflicts, what are the good things, and unfortunately it's written in Norwegian, so it's not so easy for you to read it. But it got maps. A lot of these things would have been done differently today and easier because it is handmade. But then we got a nice, good feeling with. We who work with it know these watercourses very well. And even today we are surprised ourselves that we actually know some of the schemes better than the owner. That's a good thing. So. Here is a comment on that we took out 10 terawatt hours, so it for the electricity demand. And phase 2 was also a new study on the small. So I'm not remembering correctly, Håkon, but I think actually that the master plan included every scheme bigger than 1 megawatt. But you say no, but we can discuss it. Okay. If you have the, but anyway, it was quite many small in the phase 2. We started on the revision. Actually, it was not so that it was in 1993 it was totally ended. Because it was a communication between NVE and the Ministry of Environment for 10 years. But gradually we saw that many of the schemes, because the owners adjusted the schemes, they managed to get it out of the red area into the green, and many of the schemes some of the schemes had been stopped because of the areas that were protected. So gradually the need for the number of schemes that were distributed were reduced dramatically, and gradually the need for it disappeared. I think that if we had, as Håkon also mentioned, that if we had a regional economy included from the beginning, for some schemes it would probably have done something, because afterwards we have seen, for example today we see that some hydropower plants that are giving electricity to energy consuming in industry in the remote places, they are the nerve for that industry, and quite many people and families are depending on it. So, and that kind of study we did not include into this. It would probably have done some difference, but not dramatic, I think. I would underline that we had this unified planning and assessment procedures. That was necessary, because we wanted, as Håkon mentioned, we wanted to compare the schemes. At that time we were not so focused that it was correct as long as each schemes were at the same level. They were handled systematically after the same system. We had many humans working on this, many different companies, and we would like them to be a robot. We did not, of course, but it was like they should think the same way, so that they presented something that we could compare. At the end, we also saw that we had ended up with both energy an energy overview that were more or less correct, and also with a cost estimate that was acceptable. And we also had at the end the same groups sitting and discussing, and we had some discussions in some high mountains hotel or something, right? We were sitting there and we had all these schemes, and we compared to see if there were some bad mistakes. So it was a sort of scrutinizing after. You mentioned this. Here you have the information on the economy class, and here you have information on at that time. I think this is in cost estimate from 1982. That costed 2.4 Norwegian kroner per kilowatt hour. This is a 67 gigawatt hour per year, and installed capacity 26 megawatts. So, but that is a summing up of the scheme. There are many pages, cashed up to 3, and then you have the summing of the classification from the different groups. It's one thing to comment here, and that is that, and I think also, Håkon, that we had some discussions at the end there, because we noted that once you saw how the system works. It was possible that 3 groups could say that, okay, we put -3 times, then you block it. We put -4 1 times, then you block it. And especially the -4 was scrutinized by this group that was steered by the ministries to see if there were some good reason for the minus or not. So you had a security system to see that human influence should not have that great impact on the final result. And I think that also worked. You had some discussions before we ended up with this, and it was many alternative systems that were tested out. We did not end up with a production because all alternative systems also had their disadvantages. And of course, a low economy class means that, for example, you have a very good reservoir scheme, very often, also. And then the impacts, of course, are big. That was one of the troubles, that all schemes with a reservoir obviously have more environmental impact than a scheme without reservoir. So that was handled in many ways, but I think maybe we ended up with too many of unregulated schemes up here, especially the 1.1 and one that were either rather small schemes or it was schemes with a very low reservoir capacity. But again, I think in total this scheme managed to meet some of the requirements. We ended up in a system where we could develop more hydropower without too much quarreling, at least not fighting. That was one of the targets. And obviously some of the schemes here were very sensitive. They are in areas that are conserved today, and it's good they are there. So it was. I think in total you will always find something to complain, but in total I think also today most of the power companies say that it worked. We had this comparison, for example, small and large scale project. We have an own project on that and had one rather sensitive large project, compare it to a number of small, and the groups that worked with the impacts, they actually ended up with saying that maybe it's better with the large one than all these small. In total, they do more damage than the large one. But we didn't change the system anyway. It was in Møre og Romsdal. So we did a lot of testing. That is obviously my final last picture. Chapter 3 was about horsepower. NV is horsepower, and this is growing out of the waves. It is, by the way, an artist from Liberia who did it. And yeah, I would say we have exported the idea of the master plan to several countries. Vietnam is one of them, and the World Bank took it up as an idea. I think most countries, even today, that have a lot of hydropower yet to develop, could benefit by doing something similar, not necessarily a copy. A copy is not good. This was for Norway. Another country is another country. But the idea that I would say that we gave the Norwegian politicians a very good tool to decide the future. And if in 1990, 91, it had not happened that more rain started, I guess this would have been used just to secure Norwegian electricity supply. And they had a much better background for decision than ever. So that's my final word, I think, on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, and maybe also earlier on, if there is any questions now to Torald. Yes.
My name is Fundur. I work with HS Orka, which is a power company in Iceland. Thank you for your lecture. It was very informative. I wanted to ask a question on the categorization and specifically whether you considered what we might call strategic importance of projects. For example, it's best to take an example in case you were looking at a project or a power plant in an area where the transmission system or distribution system would be lacking, and there would be a positive impact from a new power plant in that particular area. Did you consider that under the regional economic effects, or did you give special attention to this factor?
A good question, and we had that discussion. We included the cost from the power station to the national grid, but we did not do analysis on the national grid to see if that could take care of the power from that power station or maybe also from other, because in many of these areas we had several power stations. If all of them, let's say, could be developed, you had to do something with the transmission system. And but then that was too much of a guessing. So so it was decided we did not look into the transmission system as such. That has been done later. We had some discussions a few years ago about monster masts, they call it. So obviously that would have. We had a little bit of that discussion actually, saying that if an area in Oslo needed more electricity power, and it was a scheme in Oslo area, or in the close to Oslo, that is cost more, may have a higher environmental damage, and compared to one at the west coast. But if you added on the transmission system and the cost and the environmental damage by the transmission expansion, then you might end up with a decision saying that you should build maybe the closer plant because it's best for the economy. But we didn't do that kind of training, because then you know we had this large number of schemes and we didn't know which one would at the end be built. So, but it was a discussion, but never taken longer than that.
Okay, any other questions? If not, then maybe we need a little bit energy, and there's a coffee and cake outside, and we maybe have a 5 or 10 minutes break and then finish the session. Thank you.
Do you want me to put it on?
If you want.
That's the wrong one.
Guðni will start.
Sorry?
Guðni will start, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, but good to have it. Yeah.
Just put it on.
Because he has to leave.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry. Ok, lagi með það. Gengur ekki upp. Varstu búinn að senda það á mig?
Já, ég sendi á þig líka, sko, en býtur við.
Býtu hann ekki á hann.
Koma með eitthvað, er hún þarna? Er hún?
Þetta hér?
Þessi hér. Er hún hérna, já. Og síðan, nei, þetta er hérna.
Master.
Og síðan ferðu hérna í Date Modified.
Nei.
Nei, uppi hérna, hérna. Hérna, býtur hérna. Hérna, og svo aftur. Og þá ferðu GIO masterplan hérna 0-18.
Ok.
Uppi DX. Þá kemur upp. Já, þetta er það.
Okay.
Þetta, þá reynir ég að vera ekki meira svona kortir.
Ok.
Er það ekki?
Jú. Þú hefur það bara eins og vilt, sko.
Já, nei, ég er nokkuð langt í annan endan hjá mann. Hann er eftir þetta eitt frá. Ég er eftir það ekki.
Jú.
Þú tala við það?
Já.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, here I am again. I could quote Leonard Cohen. Here I am again with my brandy ice. Now, I'm going to a little bit link to what has been said before here and take some highlights from the Icelandic master plan work, just to put into context with what we've been discussing before. And I can skip some of the things I said this morning and we are of course very fortunate in Iceland because we are producing hydropower and geothermal power at cost which is very competitive due to other compared to other renewable energies. I tried to put both renewable and non-renewable, like nuclear power and oil and gas and wave and tidal and solar power in Iceland, which will be of course very expensive. And wind power is somehow getting close now to the hydropower, especially when we have the system effects. But we have, of course, had the possibility in Iceland to produce clean and very cost-effective electricity. And of course, we are very concerned about the emissions. We have now the emissions we have to work with in the national emission scheme, and of course we have the international emissions from Iceland, which is the shipping and the flights. We have the land-based emissions because we like to dry out our wetlands and so on. We have the ETS emissions, that is the emissions from the larger industry, which is within the ETS system and is dealt with there with the increasing percentage that has to be, or the percentage every year, which has to be reduced. And the good news is that the ETS scheme is working quite well. The industry is reducing their emissions in Europe, is reducing their emissions faster than expected, which means that the cost which they have to pay for the licenses to use carbon or to emit carbons is still relatively low, but we foresee that will change in the future. And then we have the emissions subject to national commitments, and that is of course what we want to reduce here. And we have then we can say that our electricity is, of course, we are producing electricity for the generating emissions in the ETS schemes, but we could look at the emissions in the ETS schemes as a trophy, because for every kilogram of CO2 that we producing the electricity, if that wouldn't be done, about 10 kilograms would be used in like a coal plant in India or Vietnam for the same amount of electricity. So we are adding to the local emissions in Iceland, but at the same time we are contributing positively to the European and to the global emission scheme. But what is left for us to work with here is the emissions from mostly from the use of carbons in communication on land, and our cars and buses and other things. And this has to be somehow converted into non-emissive fuels. And the most obvious way to do it now is to use electricity, because that is our best choice. And we see that these are the ETS emissions. They are not a problem for us. They are within the European scheme and will be treated with as such. But then we have the cars, we have the agriculture, fisheries, and then other things like waste. And we can see that how they're in relative importance there. But we see that some of this, especially the cars, and also part of the fleet and agriculture and so on can be replaced by electricity, and that's of course we see that as a positive development. And if we look at our importance here to use the renewable energy in Iceland, before, when we were in the beginning of the century, a developing country, we hardly used any fuel at all. But then we started to replace the fuel with electricity, and from mostly hydropower in the beginning, and then we started to replace the fuel for heating with geothermal, and then we started saving CO2 emissions, and then we started to replace production elsewhere in the world with hydrocarbons, with our cost-effective plants for the clean energy plants for electricity generation for industries. And we can say that if we look at this compared to using not coal but to use oil, we can see that if we continue to expand our hydropower and geothermal and wind at a normal or a moderate pace of 30.3 terawatt hours per year, our total sum accumulated reduction of CO2 for the global economy would be about 1.5 gigaton, and that is a quantity to be regarded as something of significance. This yeah. And so this is our big challenge now is to put into this context these alternatives, the biofuels, the hydrogen, the batteries, or whatever, and we can see that we have to look at the mobility and range. We have to look at infrastructure cost, operational cost, and environmental efficiency. And at the time now, the batteries are winning, but what will happen in the future, that is more difficult to see. We should never think that we are able to foresee the development of technology that will somehow always surprise us. But today we are betting in our investments, we are betting on electricity and batteries for part of the mobile system. Now, I just want to make sure that I have the right speech here. Baldur?
Yep.
Can you look at that for me? Was it the... Yeah. It's okay. Thank you. So, the master plan for the utilization of the energy resources in Iceland, they have a history since 1997, when there was a decision by the Icelandic government to develop a master plan for hydro and geothermal energy resources. And the first phase was initiated in 1999 and a final report in 2003. And these were about 19 hydropower projects and 24 geothermal projects were evaluated and ranked on environmental impact and technical economical feasibility. So there was a ranking of a big number of projects, but there was no formalization. This was more on an information level. Then we had the second phase, and then we had some changes. The new Electricity Act diminished the role of the state as a free market. The free market was allowed to be developed for electricity production. And the second phase was initiated in 2004, and the final report was issued in 2011. And this was ranking of the project by steering committee as in the first phase. and also then there was a classification which was really worked out by the ministries in order to get some results that would also have support by the government and the parliament. And then about 40 hydropower projects were evaluated and 41 geothermal projects and ranked. And based on this ranking and based on the processing within the ministries of this result, we had a parliamentary resolution which was made with the classification of the project into 3 classes. One for project available for appropriate for development, one appropriate for protection, and the 3rd class was awaiting further consideration, some kind of a waiting list. And this was then made in some kind of a strategic environmental assessment by the Ministry of Industry, supported by the Minister for the Environment, and then with a public hearing and taking care of all the responses and working on, and then a parliamentary resolution. So this was really a process where the basic information was brought on by the steering committee, but then there was a further work, both with input from the public and input from the politics, to somehow process it into a proposal which could be agreed by the parliament. Now, if we look at the class sizes in the original proposals, we can see that for development we had about 3.3 terawatt hours of hydro and 10 terawatt hours of geothermal, and we had about the same. We had about 9 terawatt hours totally on the waiting list, and for protection we had the reserved options, which are about 25 terawatt hours. So there was a rather big resources which were laid aside for protection. And we can see that the total and the existing master plan, it was about 30 terawatt hours of hydro and about 35 of geothermal in total. So compared to the 18-19 terawatt hours we are producing today, the potential is big. But as we see for the what has been reserved for protection, that there are big limitations because of environmental reasons. And we can see here that if we look at the hydropower plants in Iceland to be developed by the master plan, we see both the existing and then with the blue and then with the other color here. What's it called? Yes, we have the new plants, and they were not very many. And after the processing, many of them were put on some kind of a waiting list. So there was not so much agreement on them. So they were excluded in the political process and sent to the next steering committee, next phase for further consideration. And these were hydropower plants. And here we see that then to be developed and existing with the dark green was existing plants, and the light green were that were proposed in the plants to be developed, and we can say that one plant was then removed in the political process. And so, surprise, surprise, it was there up in the highlands. And which was also very important. And there was an act passed in May 2011 that was transforming the master plan from some kind of a voluntary process into an established and permanent planning tool. And there should be a regular re-evaluation phases every 4th year. Now, and then the approval should, as before, be made by a parliamentary resolution. And the results were to be binding for municipal land use and planning. And also it would take the river basin management plans into account. It was the Act on Water Governance, which you're working with. And so this was the same as before, but now the aim of the steering group was to not only rank the options, but also to classify them into protection, utilization, or waiting or pending. And it started with Orkustofnun collecting the power plant options and submitting them then to the steering plan, master plan steering committee, which then ranked the options according to feasibility based on research by expert committees. And then the steering committee submitted their suggestion to the Ministry for Environmental Resources, and then the ministry then presents a proposal to the Parliament for confirmation, and this proposal went a little bit unchanged from the steering committee into the Parliament. And the problem is that this proposal has not been politically approved yet. This should be happening every 4th year. Now we are we are probably in the, was it 6th or 7th year, and still hasn't been processed by the Parliament, and we don't know if that's going to happen. That's, one of the reasons is that this is a document that is proposed to the Parliament without assuring a parliamentary majority. So, if we look at then what has happened, and here we have the phases of the plan, which is the national entity starting with all the processing of the options. Then they are put to the steering committee, and then the steering committee gets a proposal to the minister. The minister presents it to the Parliament, and the Parliament then decides on the classes, and the utilization class will then go further to some kind of a processing. But then we have, of course, a new environmental assessment and licensing, and then the power plant construction. But the pending class is then going back to the next steering committee, or maybe going back to Orkustofnun to be processed back into the steering committee. So this is a circular process. And then, of course, the Parliament has also to decide on the conservation class, if everything should go in there. And if it's not approved by the Parliament, then it will go back to the Orkustofnun again. Now, so the third phase of the master plan, it was submitted to the Parliament in 2016. 8 new projects were added, 4 hydro, 3 geothermal, and 1 wind farm. And 18 projects are now categorized for utilization. So we have many projects in the pipelines, but they are not all very suited for use for utilization, because many of these projects, whether this was decided or not are in places which have no possibility for connection, like the Blanda in the north, where we have been waiting very many lines for sufficient power lines from Blanda to the remaining part of the eastern part of northern Iceland, but with no result, and we could allow us to produce more electricity there, but that wouldn't be meaningless. There are already 10 megawatts there we cannot get rid of because of the lack of connection. So this is more complex than and of course in some areas there are considerations which can result in that we will get no possibility of new plants. And we can just see that this is a lot of options which we have been working with in Iceland, and of course the red one are geothermal and the blue ones are hydropower. And then we can see if we look at the result of the last steering committee here, we see that we have new protection here. They are mostly hydropower options, or we can say whole water systems that have been proposed for conservation, which make this very politically difficult, because this is the part of Iceland where we have a lack of electricity due to bad transmission, and for environmental reasons we don't want to put a power line over the highlands, so they will not get energy from the south, and this is somehow taking away the possibility to produce electricity in the north. So I think this will be when it comes to Parliament and parliamentary discussion, we will probably see a lot of debate on this. And then we have a large waiting list, which is for the next to be processed, and then we have the utilization list with some new plants, and they are so there is a number of options there for utilization, but and in that way this is not very controversial, but this protection of large water hydro systems in the river systems in the north could create some problems for the societal aspects, which have not been so much regarded in this work. But this last picture is just to show you that when we are talking about the highlands and the untouched wilderness of Iceland, we can see in a landscape like that, it's very difficult to place any man-made things without destroying the picture. So we have to take it very seriously and take care of such areas with this very rare natural beauty. So thank you.
Is there any questions to Guðni or if not?
I can have one.
Yes.
It's actually not a question, it's just a comment. If you start with what Håkon started with, the Alta scheme. The Alta scheme actually had, and the reason why it was forced through was that part of Finnmark County did not have electricity for the industry they wanted to have locally. So that was another part of the story, that it was a scheme, there were alternatives, and I'm not saying I was lucky to be there with the different studies, because we never dared mention it actually, but anyway we had 3 other rivers, and we ended up with Alta. That was a political decision, but it was because that they did not at that time wanted to build transmission system over the area where you have the laps with their reindeers. So it looks a little bit similar to what you said now. You have many areas where you have a lack of electricity and also where there won't no hydro to be developed. So it's, yeah, it is difficult.
Yeah, but the present government has said that they will now focus on bringing to strengthen the infrastructure of the system. But the first meaning of their text on this was that there will be no power line over the highlands, and with that, I think that Tesla did not develop his theories far enough for us. Sadly, yes.
I don't need a microphone.
Yeah, because of the.
There are people in the out.
What about what about the fourth phase of the planning circle? Because it's time since number 3 was finished by the steering group and it's resting in the parliament. What's happening?
We have the chairman of the fourth phase steering group here, Gudrun Petersdottir, and I would very much like to give the word to her.
You're too kind.
Gudrun, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Well, I mean, I don't think the law made any provision for this rather unusual situation where the Parliament hasn't really dealt with the proposition of the third master plan. And we've had a couple of changes of Parliament since. There have been rather turbulent times in Icelandic politics lately. So, I mean, at the moment we're simply waiting to see what comes out of that. They have that resolution from the third to deal with at the Parliament, either to pass or to make changes to it. And that is none of our business, so to speak. We can't influence that much. But I think that our duty is really to try to take care of this tool. I think that this is a very important tool and that it served well, as you said, both of you. It served well in Norway. It has been adopted to a certain degree in other countries. And the use of land, because it's not only hydropower use or use of power options, it's the use of the land for power production that we're talking about. And we need to take other uses into account. There are other interests at stake. So these need to be weighed against one another. And I think that is the call of our times, that we work in an interdisciplinary way when we make our decisions. What can we do meantime while the resolution is pending? We work on strengthening the tool. We work on improving the methods that we will then adopt. As you mentioned, the societal aspect is coming more strongly into play, and that demands quite a lot. It is difficult to weigh the societal impact on one region against the societal impact in another. So finding a way to take that into account and showing the people who live in these areas the due respect they deserve, at the same time thinking in long term. Because our feelings towards these options today may be very dated in a couple of decades. So we're looking into the future. We're trying to find a way to make sensible decisions. Meanwhile, for the conservatory, I won't say conservative, but for the conservatory part of the audience, nature waits patiently. I don't think the rivers in Iceland give a damn, no pun intended, whether they're to be damned or not. So, I mean, if we choose to keep this tool waiting, we will do so. But we need to strengthen the tool, not undermine it. And that is the duty, I think, of all of us. And allow me to pass the word gently back to you, Gunni.
Thank you. Are there more comments? Well, I think we should get the next speaker here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Gunni, and you for all these questions and discussions. We have the next speaker then from Norway. Please. Mabak, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the invitation, for my being here. And I'm now going to round up the Norwegian part of this presentation. And this is also a kind of a retrospective version you will have. Today I'm representing myself. I'm not connected to any company or office anymore. I retired half a year ago, but prior to that I've been a kind of a, I should almost call it a kind of a chameleon in the field of nature conservation and hydropower development in Norway. I have worked on all administrative levels, at the governmental levels and the department level, yes, in the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Petroleum and Energy. I worked in directorate as NVE, both on the central and the regional level. And I worked for the county government in Hedmark county, the county governor, and even if in the political area on the county administration, the county municipality. And I also worked in a municipality, and I even been in the hydropower business. So I'm a jack of all trades in this area. And with regard to that, I had held all positions from foot soldier to general, to use a military term. The presentation will focus mainly on the practical level at work on the master plan issue. In that way, I followed the master plan from cradle to grave, to be literal. The first relation to the master plan started in at the very beginning in 1981, when I was so-called county person in Hedmark county, the red county on the eastern part of Norway. And the first job was to make a kind of a test version of the hydropower plants for up to 10 megawatts to see how the master plan idea would function. And I'm a trained ecologist, so I had to do the field studies myself, and we made this version a little less complex than the following master plan, but looked at nature conservation and outdoor recreation, wildlife and fish, and economy, and put priorities into the same grid that was later used in the main master plan for the national level. And we got quite interesting information that we can use in the coming large process. And we also looked at the some effects of impacts on nature, comparing lots of, as Torad always have mentioned, lot of small plants versus fewer large plants in the mainstreams. And we concluded that from a conflict leveling point of view, it would be rather better to utilize the power resources in the mainstreams instead of putting small hydropower stations in the tributaries and the small rivers connected to them. So that was one finding of the study. Then the hell broke loose, I should call it, the process with the main master plan. And because of my natural science background, I was able to do most of the field studies myself. I literally walked all the watersheds in Hedmark County looking at nature conservation problems, wildlife, fish, and all things related to conflict possibilities from hydropower development. And that was quite a vast undertaking. And for the summers of 1982, 1983, 1984, I didn't have summer holidays at all. I was in the field all the summer, and in the wintertime we wrote and edited project reports, as has been mentioned, as Torad showed you. In Hedmark there was approximately 30 watersheds to be investigated with a variety of developing options. And one main task was to also coordinate public meetings, because it was very important that the public, the common man, should have an idea of what was coming and what the possibilities for hydropower development in their backyard meant. And then we had to arrange excursions in all of the main projects. And then we bussed around for days with the county governor in person, and the stakeholders, and met people from the local municipalities, the mayor, some always, and that was quite an undertaking as well. And later we had to coordinate the local hearings of the individual reports and the county report, collecting a report for all the possibilities in the actual county. And as you can understand, that was quite much work, but it is very interesting. And the best benefits out of all that process, in my opinion, was that the different projects and alternatives became well known at the local level, and that was of great value of coming processes connected to hydropower development. And the way the complexity was broken down to an understandable language for local politicians, it made it more acceptable to think of hydropower development. The locals understood what it would mean in problems and benefits, and that was a very good thing about the master plan. And it's much to say about it, but the knowledge and the discussions arenas it created to level the conflict between hydropower development and nature conservation and other stakeholder options was of the largest benefit from the process, I think. And through the investigations in the watersheds, we got a large amount of new data and knowledge, and that gave the background for coming management plans for the main rivers in the county, the Glomma River, Trysil River, and Orkla. And this was prior to the EU Framework Directive water plans. So it was a kind of a transitional way of handling hydropower problems and benefits to other stakeholders and other user interests. So that was of great value. The next phase, with my connection to the master plan, I was the national leader for the second revision of the parliamentary report leading to stortingsmelding, or parliament report, the third one, and the last one in 1991 to 92, and it passed parliament in 1993. It was very good for me and the process as a whole to have the background that I had, that I was well known with the methodologies and the natural geographic areas of all the country. And I'm proud to say that politicians, political background that we made for further hydropower development, it stood until, as both Torod and Håkon has mentioned, it stood until 2017, and it was abandoned, and that's quite a long period. And writing the third parliamentary report, we have to coordinate that process with two other large processes at the same time, namely the expansion of the number of national parks in Norway, and the expansion of the Water Course Protection Plan, number 4 in the rank. And that was a very complex political work to do. We didn't use work, we made the ground for the politics to that planning process, and that was all many different departments and ministry were included. But then again, it was very well background to have been through the previous work of the master plan. And the most important thing was that the knowledge to the different catchment areas, we knew exactly when you should draw the line, where the line for the new national park was, or the border. You had to know exactly how much hydropower potential you took out if you took that valley and that valley and that valley. So this was a whole kind of prioritizing nature conservation up to hydropower development, and that was also we benefited from the detailed work that had been done in previous years. That was phase 3 in my relation to the master plan. I was first in 1995 to 98 head of the regional NV office at the southeastern part of Norway. and later I was director for the water resource department at the main office. And my main responsibility was flood protection and flood mitigation and water management, water resources management in general on a national basis. And also there it was very useful to have all the knowledge about processes, politicians and universities and all who had supported the previous work we had years back. And I also had the leading of office of the coordination of the last supplementary process for the National Water Course Plan in Norway, and it was about 60 watersheds, I think, we supplemented to the national plan. But that was the last of the expansion of the protection plan, so that political process has now come to an end, probably. And again, the geographical knowledge from decades of connection to the master plan was of immense value. For my role as a national responsible for flood protection work and erosion control, I knew all the, and I knew how to get more information on a local, even on a local basis on that background. And that was very useful both for the institution and for me as a leader of that part of the institution. And then the fourth phase of my relation to the master plan, then I put another hat on and was managing director for the Glommen and Lågen Water Management Association. As you can see on the map to your right, it is the eastern. It's not possible to see from the border to Sweden, but it's close to the border to Sweden, and it's the largest catchment area in Norway. And the main job was to optimize the hydropower production based from the water in the large reservoirs in the southeastern part of Norway, as I said, the Glomma catchment area. There were 16 owners that you should coordinate. Ownership was mainly on public hands, the municipalities and the county municipalities, and just a few private owners of small parts of the production plants. There were 27 reservoirs and 7 large diversions and about 50 power plants, and the average annual power production was about 12 terawatt hours, and the main contribution to the power production was the production in a winter period, when 35% of the production was based on water from the reservoirs up in the mountains. The GLB area is quite large, depending on how you compare, but it's 13% of the Norwegian landmass, and on average roughly 10% of the annual hydro production in Norway. And again, the experience from the master plan was a great value as a basis for production options for applications for public licenses. We had, if you want to develop more hydropower, you have to apply for a license in Norway. And for some of the concessions or the licenses, you have to revise terms every 30 years for the private part. And from the knowledge that we gained from Samraplan or the master plan, we had lots of background to make new applications. And that was of great value. Yes, and I can give you an example of some such kind of application. It's the upper Otta water catchment in the western upper part of the Glomma catchment area. It contains a diversion a new diversion between two reservoirs, and because of the level difference, you had to mount a pump that you used during part of the year. And as you can see on the map, we also had the possibility to build a new power station. And again, this was a very complex area to operate in, and the total energy potential of the upper Otta region was approximately 3 terawatt hours. But due to the process with the national park and the protection plan for hydropower in Norway, 2/3 of that potential was protected, and the last third was free for hydropower development. So out of that we managed to take out about 750 gigawatt hours. And again, it was a very complex area. It was probably the most complex area in the whole master plan process. It contained about 34 different alternatives, but thanks to the pre-going processes with the master plan, it was a very, very valuable basis for the new license process. So you almost can say that the master plan paved the way for getting the new license through, and then we succeeded. And that was a very interesting part of my last connection to the master plan. Yes.
It is a question to that. I will take it now while you have the picture. Because it was in the master plan and you was part of it. It was an agreed solution from all the groups that actually you could take out more.
Yeah.
But the political parties have a trend. They will also at the end or after the end have something to say. So it was more or less reduced to by some 50%.
I think so. But the politics is about like the
you
horse
cannot-
trading. You have to
cannot
give.
trust them.
You have to
cannot trust
give every side a little bit, and it boiled down to just 3/4 of the potential that was released for hydropower development, and that's how it was. My main occupation nowadays is to watch the scenery from my cabin the upper part of the largest catchment area in Scandinavia. This is the Lake Femund at the roof of the catchment that runs all the way down through the eastern part of Norway, through Sweden, and meets the sea at Gothenburg. And on Tuesday, when I went here, there was minus 33. So I'll go back this weekend. So I'm very happy that I'm not only dependent on hydropower, but also on firewood. So thank you for your attention.
Are there any maybe short questions in the end? If not,
Maybe one.
maybe one.
Hi, and thank you all for good day. Heyrist ekkert í mér eða?
I don't listen.
Þetta verður myndala, okay. Sorry. My question was, did I understand that one point you take into consideration when you decide to build a dam or not is whether it will help preventing flooding?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
We used reservoirs to. This was a very large river system, as you can see, but we used in a great flood in '95, for example, we used reservoirs to take the peak of the flood, because it's the peak situation that makes the most damage. So we tried to figure out how to get the water stream to level out the peaks of the flood wave.
Yes, I'm asking because we have one option in north part of Iceland, where that was one point the landowners in the valley pointed out that it would be good for them to have the dam because to stop the flooding. Another question, mostly for curiosity, the river Glomma, I believe I heard that it was also a big resource for drinking water.
Yeah,
that's right.
Actually, the Norwegian Coca-Cola processing industry takes water from River Glomma to Lillestrøm, and you have to go through several stages of clearance before it is tapped into Coca-Cola bottles, but it's a main resource for water supply. But most of the supply is taken from groundwater besides the river in the riverbed and the areas around the river, not usually directly from the river stream, but Coca-Cola does. So maybe that's because the Coca has a brown color. Who knows?
Okay, thank you. This has been a long day, going from the global in the morning session and policy and CO2 towards more narrow discussion on master plan and local. It has been very informative, and any such a discussion hopefully help people here in Iceland and you guys from os.is to work on this. It's a complex issue, definitely, a lot of elements, technical, economic, and so on. Thank you for all, and thank you for coming, and thank you for the audience out there. A special thanks to all the countries, Norway, Australia, Finland, Japan, US, Brazil, from Iceland, and the EEA, of course. Thank you very much. It has been a great and constructive information and discussion, and I wish you all the best.